everyone for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful and insightful time here. This event is brought to you by Decode as part of our bi-weekly series. For those who aren't familiar with us yet, Decode is a global community of ambitious creators and passionate builders. We are a nonprofit with roots in the tech and entrepreneurship community in Silicon Valley. And over the past 5 years, we have hosted with more than 10,000 audiences from around the world every year at our events with notable speakers, including Eric Yuan, founder and CEO of Zoom, Matt Jacobson, father of Instagram, Steve Juvertson, board member of SpaceX and Tesla, Michael Sabo, CEO of Y Combinator, and Astro Talog, CEO of Google X, among many other notable speakers. Our recent conference back in October last year had garnered over 1.3 million views across 44 countries and thus prompted us to kick off this speaker series today. And with that, today, our very first session. So our next speaker session on 27th January with Karen Kimbrough, the chief economist at being our speaker. Stay tuned for more information on the event and we will hope to see you there also. Also, if you would like to volunteer with Decode on future events, please do send an email to carriers@decode.com and I will drop the link box as well. And also, now let's go through some of the logistics for today's event. There will be a question and answer session at the end, so do send in any questions that you have for our speaker via Zoom chat directly to me, and we will go through as many questions as possible, but note that we will not be able to have time to cover all of them. And also for those who purchased Gorick's book via our Eventbrite, we will be confirming your shipping address with you, and you should receive the book within a week upon confirmation. And for those of you who want to purchase Gorick's book after today's session, we will be sending out an email after this event, which includes a link to his Amazon page. And then, yep. Now let us invite our speaker for today, Gorick Ng, who will be sharing about secrets and strategies to starting your career and becoming a top performer. Gorick is a career advisor at Harvard College, specializing in coaching first-generation low-income students. He has managed new employees at Boston Consulting Group, worked in investment banking at Credit Suisse, and is also a researcher with the Managing the Future of Work project at Harvard Business School. He has also been featured in the Star, the Globe and Mail, the New York Post, World Journal, and on CBC. He is a first-generation college student and is also a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School. This session will be moderated by Shuo Chen, who is the general partner at IOVC and CEO of Shenek, and a Silicon Valley-based nonprofit community of more than 5,000 engineers passionate about entrepreneurship. She is also an advisory board member of Yale School of Medicine's Center for Digital Health and Innovation, and also a lecturer at UC Berkeley, as well as a faculty member at Singularity University. And so now is the let us invite our speaker for this event. Um, Hi, so yeah, we will begin our today's session. Hi, we can begin our today's session. Sure. Um, I think you're muted, Shuo.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks, Maya. Hi, everyone. Happy 2021. I can't believe it's 2021 already. But I'm really excited to be here today to welcome our first speaker of the new year, a longtime friend, actually for more than 10 years, as we were talking about the other day, and also youngest author at Harvard Business Review, super accomplished. Really honored and such a pleasure to have Gorick with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Shuo. Thanks for Decode for organizing, and for all of you for spending the next hour with me. This really means a lot.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for being here. So I guess to get started, would love to start with your story. I've known you for a long time, but I would love for you to share your story with everyone else because it's such an inspiring story.
Appreciate that. You know, that's actually surprisingly a difficult question, because I suspect you and I and many folks on this call will be able to relate. We've been conditioned to tell our personal story in a certain way for college applications, for graduate school applications, in our cover letters, in our resumes, where we've gotten so used to truncating it down to that elevator pitch. So I'll give it to you in two ways: the abridged version and then the slightly less abridged version. The more abridged version is that I'm a first generation college student turned Harvard graduate, turned investment banker, turned management consultant, turned Harvard Business School MBA, turned author of a forthcoming book in April of 2021 titled The Unspoken Rules: Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right, which is a how-to guide for early career professionals on how to go day zero of your job. How do you prepare for that first day, all the way through to your promotion? How do you set yourself up to get promoted in an environment where there may not even be a natural career path? It's a compilation of over 500 interviews that I've done with professionals across geographies and industries and job types on the lessons that they wish someone could have told them when they were first starting out. So that's the elevator pitch. That's the very professional, polished, I guess, spiel of mine. If I may, I'd love to be able to share the story that I tell myself in the shower and when times get tough, which I split up in my head into 5 chapters. I think for those of you who have seen trilogies, you're probably thinking to yourself, man, wasn't Lord of the Rings only 3 movies? What makes you think you can have 5? So bear with me, I'll zoom through them as quickly as I can. Where chapter 1 was when I was 14 years old, and my mom, a single mother who's from a working class background, was laid off from her sewing machine factory job. And I, as the person in the house who was proficient in English, who could get onto the internet, who knew how to Google, became responsible for helping her get back on her feet. And so at 14, I spent recesses learning to write resumes, afternoons at the public library looking for jobs, and evenings coaching my mom. On weekends, she and I would tag team together to go to strangers' houses where we would clean people's bathrooms and kitchens to make ends meet. I mentioned that story not because there's actually a happy ending to it. She ended up getting back on her feet, but it wasn't through my Googling. And it was from that experience that I started wondering, how could I, someone who was proficient at Googling, who knew English, who was working hard, and so was she, not be able to set ourselves up for success? Let me come back to that. That's chapter 1. I'll sort of skip ahead in this book that is my life. The second chapter was in high school, where I was a part of a community service event and had a chance to meet someone by the name of Sandy, who was a couple of years older than me, who had gone to another high school. And she was applying to some of America's top colleges. We became friends, and over our friendship, I had a chance to follow her process through the college admissions process. Through her, I learned what the Ivy League was. I learned how to pronounce Dartmouth. You know, I learned all these things that I didn't even know existed. And through her, I also had an appreciation for how to get in. And it wasn't just a matter of following the instructions that were on these colleges' websites. Getting in required a little bit more than that, a lot more than that, actually, where you had to write your essays a certain way. You had to ask for recommendation letters in a certain way. You had to put your portfolio and your entire story together in a certain way. And through Sandy, I was lucky enough to have gotten into a place like Harvard, where I was a first-generation college student. Chapter 3 was when I was in college. I was walking home from the library one day, minding my own business, when I bumped into a bunch of classmates of mine walking the other direction. I was dressed in jeans and a hoodie. They were dressed in suits. The next day in class, I overheard whispers of an invite-only recruiting event put on by a company that had come to a career fair the prior day. I had gone to that career fair. I had picked up some swag. I had a plastic water bottle, some brochures, a magnet, I believe. Little did I know that my classmates had gone to the same event, but had approached that event in a very different way, where I went up and just took the swag and walked away. They had actually built relationships with this employer behind the scenes long before that recruiting event even started. And at the event, we're saying the right things to the right people at the right time. Fast forward, I had a water bottle. They got job offers. Fast forward to chapter 4. I was in the professional world. I'm skipping over a lot here, I realize, where I was in investment banking and management consulting. And I was told that the way you get assignments in the workplace was you wait for your staffer, the person who has a master Excel spreadsheet of all the opportunities. And that person would have your interests at heart and would give you exactly the project that you want that would help you reach your career goals. Those were the spoken rules. Little did I know that people were networking behind the scenes with partners and vice presidents and MDs to get on projects that weren't even advertised through this Excel spreadsheet. The last chapter is the chapter of returning to business school. And when I returned to business school, I became a career advisor, a resident career advisor at Harvard. It was the first day of training for this position. And I can still remember the slide. Actually, I was looking at that slide just last night as I was reflecting upon the story, where there was a session in this training called Supporting a Diverse Student Body. And there was a PowerPoint slide that was projected in a lecture hall. And that slide had 3 circles in a Venn diagram. The first circle was low income. So in the Harvard context, it's students who were on full financial aid, who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The second was first generation, which is a fancy way of saying that you're the first in your family to pursue higher education. And then the third circle was from a non-target school, meaning that you came from a high school that didn't typically send students to Harvard. There was a study done at the university where they took stock of who fit into which of those 3 categories. And there was a small footnote that I don't think anyone caught, but I caught, where it said intersection of all 3 circles, 3%. I quickly did the math, 48 people at Harvard. I then did a bit of self-reflection and I realized I was among that 48. It was one of those things that I just couldn't unsee, where here I was struggling in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and not knowing why. All of a sudden, that slide gave me the vocabulary, which was that I was coming from a background where I didn't have the mentors, the parents who had been there and done that, who could guide me through what they had gone through. Instead, I, with my mom, was going through it through trial and error. I, thanks to Sandy, was able to overcome that trial and error, only to go through the trial and error of college, only to go through the trial and error once again in the workplace. And so that seemingly benign PowerPoint presentation helped me appreciate that there's so many things that I just didn't know I didn't know. What responsibility did I have now to help those who didn't know what they didn't know learn what they should know? And so that's what brings me to the point in my life that I'm at today of trying to write this book to demystify some of these unspoken rules to getting ahead in your career. I gave you a really long answer there, but that really is the shower thought that I have with myself.
And thank you so much for that story. I mean, as well as I've known you, it's always such a powerful reminder of why what you're doing now is so important. And really, when I think whether it's me or anyone else on this call right now, think back, the scariest moments are always those when you don't even know what you don't know. So you don't even know how to get started. It's not that you don't have the intention to do the right thing, but you don't even know what those are. And I very much resonate with your story. I remember even starting at work and thinking that at least I know how to do emails, and having to have someone sit down with me and show me this is the proper etiquette for email chains. This is how you sort through emails. And this is all the right set of things to do that might seem so obvious to some people. But without someone to actually sit down and mentor you through all the basics, you just would never know. So that's why I think your book is so meaningful, because it really combines everything from kind of the first day to longer at work, to navigate all these things that no one else tells you about. So now I have to get to the story of what is your book about?
Mm-hmm. So it's a how-to guide on how to manage expectations, how to manage your manager, how to show up on your first day, how to ask for vacation, how to get promoted even if there isn't a proper career path for you, how to manage workplace conflicts, how to avoid and then navigate workplace politics, how to communicate professionally. All of those little things, I call them unspoken rules. These are things that managers expect you to know, but that they'll never explain to you. And that top performers in the workplace are subconsciously doing without necessarily even realizing it. That's what I'm trying to deconstruct. I'm trying to turn what is otherwise tacit knowledge into what's explicit, and that is something that we can start talking about, not only as early career professionals around how to survive and thrive, but hopefully it also sparks a broader dialogue among organizations around how to build more inclusive cultures that work for everyone.
And we'll definitely dig into all of your pieces of advice for everyone on this call. I know that Maya is collecting questions in the back end, so we'll have targeted questions for you. Before we dive into the content of your book, we obviously talked through your story growing up and a lot about what motivated you to write this book. But what was the moment for you when you realized that writing a book was the right way to go? And how did all of this come together?
Mm-hmm. It was never my goal to write a book. I probably wouldn't have gone to business school had that been my ambition. I didn't think of myself as a good writer. I still don't. When I was in the workplace, I started collecting interview notes that I had, interview notes of interviews that I had done with people who were initially my friends and then who were friends of friends and then strangers, where I was struggling in the workplace and I wanted to figure out why, and I wanted to figure out whether I was alone. And so I went out and talked to, friends of friends and so on and so forth. And I had notebooks, napkins, Evernotes, draft emails, and I had been sitting on all this content for a while. And when I got to business school, I wanted to potentially turn it into a startup where you could have perhaps an on-demand coach that you could access 24/7, that buddy in your pocket that I wish I would have had, that I could have had when I was first starting out. Then I started reflecting upon the college admissions process. I guess that was chapter 2. And when I look back at the college admissions process, I thought to myself just how fortunate I was to have someone like Sandy in my life, because as I met many of my peers at places like Harvard and other schools, I started realizing that there's an entire industry of coaches that will charge you I don't even know, but making this up, $50,000 to get a kid into college, into a good school, or your money back. And I thought to myself, wow, how fortunate was I to to have had someone like Sandy in my life, because I otherwise wouldn't have learned these unspoken rules. That flashback was important because I started realizing that I was very quickly going down a path of becoming that elite coach that was creating a product that would serve the privileged at the expense of those who really needed it, who were the first generation low-income students that I really wanted to serve and that I could relate to. So I did a lot of soul searching in business school, and the concept of price discrimination came up. For those who are not familiar with the word price discrimination, it's a fancy way of saying that you charge different prices for different segments of the population. And I started asking myself, well, what is the cheapest, most affordable way for me to get this information out there? Should I be a blogger? Should I be an influencer? Should I be creating an app? Should I do something else? And I started realizing that, well, maybe the easiest, most accessible way to get this information out there, at least as a starting point, is to just simply write it down. And so I met a professor who encouraged me to turn my research into a book. I thought it was only going to take 6 months, a single semester. Fast forward 3 years and I'm still at it. So it was never my goal to write this book, but I'm glad that I did it, and I hope that it'll help at least one person.
And I'm really glad that you explained that this is a 3-year-long process, because oftentimes people look at, the end game, which is you're the youngest author published by Harvard Business Review. You have endorsements from all these awesome people, and it feels like it was overnight success. And I love that you contextualize the process of writing this book as really not just the final product, but also soul searching for you and figuring out the right content to be presented. And something I remember that kind of struck me as we were talking about in the speaker interview earlier, you were talking about how you send out a personal update email to folks. And I remember in your email that you wrote about how many rejections you had to go through before you had a book deal that went through. If it's okay to share with everyone here, maybe you could talk a little bit about the process of writing your book so that people don't just look at the end product and think that, it's just magically what happens without hard work.
Sure. Let me first touch upon what you said about overnight success. I have nowhere near success. I think it's overnight something, and I don't know what that something is. Maybe it's not maybe it's a 3-year-long something. At least that's where I am right now. When it comes to the process, I started this whole actual writing process in January of 2018. I had met this professor in around November, December. He encouraged me to write a book. I said, no way. I spent winter break introspecting and asking, talking to some friends who encouraged me to pursue this. I finished my first draft as an independent project in May of 2018. My professor introduced me to a colleague of his who introduced me to a publisher. That publisher quickly said no. The reason being that they didn't quite like the content. And I was at a crossroads at that point. I was thinking to myself, should I turn this into a startup after all? Should I continue working on this? And so I spent the summer after business school working on a startup idea during the day and trying to push forward this book on nights and weekends. And by the end of that summer, I started realizing that I was getting more and more passionate about writing this down. I wasn't actually doing a startup wasn't the end goal. It was a means to an end. And the end was to make an impact. And I was more and more convinced that no matter what path I would go down, that writing it down was the first step. So I went all in on the writing process. At that point, I had written a book proposal, which is essentially a pitch deck, but in Word doc format. It's about 25 pages that go into detail around who your market is, who your target market is, who you are, why you're differentiated, who your competitors are, all that kind of stuff. I pitched to a number of agents. The unspoken rule, I guess, of publishing here is to get a traditional book deal with, let's say, the Penguin Random Houses, the Simon & Schuster's, these big publishers. You actually need to work with an agent. So you first pitch to agents. I pitched to agents, plenty of rejections. I got introduced to my current agent, and he loved the idea and then forwarded my proposal along to his network of publishers. And then the rejections came through. And a lot of them were actually about me not having a platform, which is a fancy way of saying you're not famous enough. So if I had 1 million Instagram followers, great. I'd be a shoo-in. But because I was a nobody trying to be a somebody and very far from being a somebody, everyone said no thanks. Luckily, there was a publisher that took me, and that publisher was Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business Review was a long time coming as well. It took a while for us to set up that meeting, to convince them that this was something that they should publish. And so I didn't actually even get my book contract until January of last year. And then from there on, I started writing and rewriting some more until I finally finished the manuscript just about 3 months ago.
I think that's a really good way of contextualizing this journey for everyone, especially as anyone in the audience is thinking about whether starting a company or even writing a book. And when we caught up, you talked a little bit about how writing a book, or the process of writing a book, was actually very similar to running a company or starting a startup. Maybe you could talk briefly about that.
Absolutely. So there's, in startup land, this concept of a job to be done, which is that you want to build a company that solves a pain point for a user. That's what your app is about. It's not just because it's a cool widget. It's because it solves a pain point. Books solve a pain point too, at least when it comes to the business nonfiction category. And so when it came to developing my pitch deck, it was all about coming up with that pain point. And the pain point that I was focused on was the uncertainty and anxiety that someone coming straight out of school would have when they're approaching a new environment that's unfamiliar to them. That was the pain point, and my solution was to deconstruct all the things that someone wished they could have known when they were in that position. And then you have to start doing market research around who your competitors are, in the same way that you would have to do that slide in a pitch deck. So I did a lot of Googling. I looked at alternatives. I looked at influencers in the space, documented that. I then had to document a go-to-market strategy where, because I didn't have a platform, what were all the different ways that I would try and get this book out there? This was perhaps where the business mindset really helped, I think, in my pitch, where publishers are mostly used to people, well, writing, and authors who are probably / definitely more proficient at Microsoft Word than they are in PowerPoint. And what I ended up doing was I made a slide deck. Actually, I made several slide decks. And one of the slides that I made that I felt like really helped seal the deal was a waterfall slide, where you have a bar on the left-hand side, and then you trickle it down and you show what that bar consists of. And what I documented there was that the total addressable market, the TAM, the full universe of people that I could reach, was actually massive. That there were 4 million new grads that were going from school to work every year, that there is no book in this category, that this was a way for us to lodge ourselves into this space as the go-to resource for anyone who's going from school to work. I don't know if that slide ended up being the thing that made the impact, but it was a huge differentiator in comparison to folks who would have just shown up with a Word document. And I'd like to think that it also gave people a lot more confidence, because Google told me that the average book only sells a couple hundred copies in its lifetime. And I think it's maybe 5,000 in its lifetime. So to show the 4 million, hopefully got people excited.
I think that's a really good perspective to have, that you can tackle any issue with a very structured mindset. And definitely PowerPoint is where the banker and consultant part of it comes useful. And it's interesting that you titled your book The Unspoken Rules. So why Unspoken Rules?
Yeah, it relates back to the 5 chapters of my life, where the commonality was this observation that there's what is written, and then there's what is unwritten, and there's what is spoken and what is unspoken. And following the written rules and the spoken rules in so many aspects of life is merely the ticket to admission. That what it takes to actually get ahead isn't the written and the spoken, it's the unspoken. It's the stuff that is tacit knowledge. It's the stuff that no Google search and no public library could share with you because it's locked inside of mentors and parents who would coach you or pass it down over the dinner table. That's why I called it the unspoken rules.
And with that, we definitely have to get into the specifics of what the unspoken rules are. So I know in terms of our audience, we have a good share of students as well as professionals. So maybe let's start with the students part of our audience. So for both undergrads and grad students in our audience today, what would you wish you had known back when you were a student yourself?
Yeah, so, and I'll actually answer this in a way that hopefully it would resonate with the professionals as well. And this is actually the thesis of my book, where the minute you step foot into an interview, a recruiting event, a networking session, and in the case of having a job already, your first day in a job, anytime you step foot into the professional world, your coworkers, managers, partners, and clients are asking themselves 3 questions. 1, can you do the job well? 2, are you excited to be here? And 3, do we get along? And I call this framework the 3 C's of competence. Can you do the job well? Compatibility. Are you excited to be here? And do we get along? Compatibility. And your job as a job seeker, a new hire, is to convince others to answer yes to all 3 questions. What does that look like in the context of a job seeker? Well, when you approach a professional in a coffee chat, you should have done your homework about what that company is all about, what it's been up to recently, who its clients are, who the most important people are, how it's been in the news, what initiatives it's currently pursuing, to show that you're competent. And because of that competence, you're now showing that you're willing to go above and beyond to show that you're committed to this job and that you're not just applying everywhere. You may be applying everywhere, but you're giving particular focus to this particular company. And then compatibility is all about finding people who can see you as a younger version of themselves, because people like people who are like themselves. And so when it comes to finding people that you could potentially connect with behind the scenes, it's about finding someone who may have a shared history with you, whether it's similar hometown, similar major, similar school, similar extracurricular activities, similar religious group, et cetera. We can actually apply this framework to the workplace as well. And that's really the focus of my book, where there are a certain set of things that you could do to elevate your perceived competence, compatibility, and commitment, and your actual competence, compatibility, and commitment. Happy to go into detail. I wouldn't want to belabor this. Obviously, I've spent a whole book talking about this framework and untangling it, but that's the starting point.
Yeah, maybe we could get into, obviously we have Q&A coming in, but maybe if we could get into one specific piece of advice in each of these categories, maybe even starting with this compatibility point, because especially as some of the folks here are in school or fresh out of school, one particular difficulty is for people who are already underrepresented is that you can't find someone who is that similar to you, whether it's in the school, whether it's in school or in the workplace. So in that case, what are some of your specific recommendations for how people can really build that connection and build up their compatibility?
Mm-hmm. It can be really difficult, especially if your coworkers are chit-chatting about sports or other topics that you may not be interested in or have a background in. And I have stories of people who just stayed quiet in these meetings because they didn't feel like they had anything to contribute. And I've been in that position myself. What I'd say in situations like that is to follow an acronym that I have in the book called EAR, E-A-R, engage, ask, repeat, where instead of just staying quiet, show some interest of, oh, interesting, I haven't been to this place before. What's it all about? Or tell me about tell me about this experience. Simply showing interest and having others talk about themselves could be an easy way to spark that relationship, one that wouldn't have otherwise existed. And when in doubt, ask a question. You don't necessarily have to always be contributing an intelligent comment, simply ending a sentence with a question mark may be all it takes to build that compatibility. And when in doubt, just repeat it. Have others talk, find something that they said that you can latch onto, contribute a little bit more about yourself, and keep going from there. I'll illustrate with maybe an odd citation in my footnotes, which is I end up citing from a marriage expert named John Gottman. There's this concept called bidding in marriages. I'm not in that position, so I don't have the lived experience, but I thought it was an interesting concept that you can apply to the workplace as well, where this marriage expert found that couples who tend to stay together are couples that are good at picking up on the other person when they're looking for human connection. And a human connection could be something really simple, like, hey, I'm hungry, or oh, it's cold outside, or even holding the door open. These are all subtle, unspoken ways, sometimes spoken ways of saying, hey, I want to build a relationship with you right now. I want to break the ice. And you, in that situation, let's say your partner is saying like, hey, have you grabbed lunch yet? That's a bid. You, as the recipient of that bid, have a couple of options. You can say, didn't you just eat? Or who has time to eat? Aren't you busy? Which is shooting down that bid. Or you can toss back that bid and acknowledge that bid by saying, oh yeah, let's grab something. And in the workplace, those of you who've worked before will know that before and after meetings are prime time to build compatibility with your coworkers. All it takes sometimes is to ask, how was your weekend? Or where are you coming from? Or how's your day so far? Those are all bids, hidden opportunities for you to embrace others' bids and then to spark a relationship that would have otherwise not occurred.
I'm actually really happy that you cited Dr. Gottman, because I really like a lot of the other stuff he mentions in his study, including a lot of the data analysis work that he does, where he talks about kind of the right percentage of response to bids that somehow magically help couples stay together longer. So when I was reading through your book and I saw that you cited him, I was really excited, because a lot of those concepts are super relevant in any relationship, whether it's in friendships or even workplace relationships. So I'm really glad that you shared that with folks. It's super practical advice as well. On that, I wanted to kind of extend that a little bit into mentorships, and then we'll get into advice for professionals, like top advice you have for someone starting a job or things that they can do to better improve their position at their job. But for people who are still in school, whether undergrad or grad school, what are some effective ways for them to start to build these mentorship-like relationships? Obviously, professors can fall into one category, but also it could be that, say, given COVID, now that everything is online and virtual, they're attending an event like this. What is a way in which they could potentially start to build a relationship with someone that they really resonate with?
Yeah, I think about relationships as sitting in three categories, where there are people you already know or that you are in close proximity with. So your classmates, teammates on sports teams.
I think Gorick might have just gotten out. Can everyone else still hear me okay? I'm getting a thumbs up. So let me ping Gorick and let him know that I think we lost him for a sec. While Gorick is working on joining back into this group, I know Maya has been collecting questions in Q&A or in chat, so thank you to everyone who submitted a question. Let me just ping him. Well, on that topic, I guess I could share a little bit about my experience while Gorick is working on getting his way back. So through Decode, we've hosted a number of series of talks from different speakers that we can hyperlink to when we send this recorded video out. But Michael Seibel, the CEO at YC, for example, has a really great example where usually at events, especially when he's come spoken for us in the past, he'll always publicly share his email and invite people to reach out to him. But the actual number of people who reach out to him is very, very low, nowhere close to even 1% of the audience. And that's very much been my experience as well. As some of you guys might know here, I've been lecturing at Berkeley for the past few years. And usually I always invite students who are interested in startups and entrepreneurship to reach out to me. And whenever I'm done speaking to a class of, say, like 300 students, I mean, on a lucky day, for anyone who's emailing me, I think out of a class, it would be already rare for, say, like 2 to 3 people to even email me. And then an even smaller percentage of people to kind of continue to stay in touch. Hey, Gorick, welcome back.
Hi there.
Hey.
This goes to show that even if you're at Harvard, which I am, the Wi-Fi can still be spotty.
Oh, it's all good. At the last conference we were hosting, the COO of VMware lost internet connection in the middle of all of this. So even if you're one of the leading executives in Silicon Valley, this just happens. So totally not your fault.
Yeah, so to all the undergrads who are struggling to tune in to their synchronous lectures and camped outside of a Starbucks in hopes of getting some free Wi-Fi, you're not alone.
There we go. So I was just sharing with them the importance of even reaching out to speakers while you were gone, because we were talking about how to build relationships even at a virtual event. And I was just sharing how Michael Seibel, the CEO of YC, whenever he comes to speak for Decode, he always shares his email, but a very small percentage of people actually reach out, if even 1% at that. And that's very much been my experience as well. I always invite people to feel free to reach out, but very few people actually do. And then an even smaller amount of people actually stay in touch. So one thing that I even recommend is that sometimes you don't even know if you would have chemistry with someone until you actually reach out for a conversation. You know, briefly introduce yourself, mention that you're happy to be helpful, and try to have a conversation. So that was just wrapping up what we were talking about while you were gone. Welcome back.
Thanks. Sorry for the mishap there.
All good. So you were in the middle of sharing with us advice that you have for everyone for building relationships. You mentioned people who might share in similar hobbies, and then that's where we lost you.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you've got that first category of people who you already know or are in close proximity with. So anyone on this call is now at least virtually in close proximity with you. So is now considered in that inner circle. The second ring are the people that you don't yet know, but that you could get introduced to. And here, LinkedIn is a really useful tool because anyone with the flag second degree connection is someone that you don't yet know, but that someone can easily put you in touch with. And so the process there is simply to say, Shuo, I noticed that you're connected to so-and-so. I'm interested in getting in touch with this person for X and Y reasons. Are you by chance close enough to this person to broker an intro? No hard feelings. If not, just thought I'd ask. And then there's all this etiquette around Shuo reaches out with a blurb that I write. Shuo brokers the introduction. I put Shuo on BCC. I offer times to meet. We get on the phone. I send a calendar invitation before we get on the phone. I send a thank you email after the phone call. So there's a whole orchestration that you go through, and I talk about that as one of the unspoken rules. There is a routine to getting asked to meeting someone, and when you violate those rules, people notice. So that's the second ring. And then the third ring are the people that you don't yet know and that you don't have someone who can connect you. And that's where cold emails can be helpful, where nowadays it's so easy to search for a company to figure out what the email template looks like. Is it first dot last name at company.com? Is it first initial last name at company.com? Is it first name at company.com? So simply guessing that email and sending them a cold email sometimes is all it takes to build that relationship. The idea here is, though, to know your audience. So there's a difference between writing an email that someone can read and interpret as an email that could have been sent to someone else, and an email that is 100% tailored to the individual. So the rule that I have here is reread that cold email through the lens of, if I had accidentally sent this to the wrong person, would that person still be able to read and understand this email? If the answer is yes, your email is probably not customized enough, and you need to do more research into what you and this other person have in common.
That's super good advice, especially on your second advice with the whole orchestration of how to get an intro to someone. That's really something that not many people actually talk about. And I don't remember ever finding public information on this back in the day. And I remember people had to really walk me through this because there was no way for me to figure out the right order in which everything goes in when I first started way back in the day. So for anyone who wants to obviously learn more, you can buy Gorick's book or rewind in this recorded video and listen to that. That was literally one sentence, but literally laid out the entire process. So that was just great advice. And so we talked a lot about advice for students. I would also love to launch into advice for new grads, as well as people who've been in their jobs for a while. So for someone who's starting their job new, what would be some of the top advice? Let's start with top 2 to 3, when they're starting fresh at a new job.
Sure. So I'll go through this as quickly as I can, where the first is to see the big picture. So before your first day, search for the company, read the executive bios, search for the company on Google News, go on to alerts, excuse me, go on to alerts.google.com, send an alert for that company, send an alert for the competitors, send an alert for key terms that are used in this industry. And I'm not going to be able to recall every single line in the Mad Lib exercise that I have in the book, but one very simple to-do item you can add to your to-do list before that first day is to try and fill in the following blanks in the sentence. Blank company does blank for blank to achieve blank, or some version of that. So we could fill it in with, let's say, Uber. Uber is an app that connects passengers to drivers in order to help people get from A to B and to help drivers make money on the side, making that up. But it's surprising to me how few people who are well into their careers cannot, in a concise way, explain what the heck their company does. And this limits your career opportunities, where if only the executives and board members understand the big picture, they're the only ones who are going to be able to contribute to these substantive high-level conversations. Meanwhile, if you as a new grad and intern can get on that level and have that breadth and depth of understanding, you all of a sudden are now able to go from being completely invisible in a meeting to being an active contributor to a meeting. So that's the first one, seeing the big picture. The second one is, as an intern, a new grad, a co-op, an apprentice, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, so you're going to be the person that people will delegate tasks to. There's an unspoken rule that I call what, how, by when, which is to say that when you're delegated a task, you should be asking yourself 3 questions. What do I need to do? How do I need to do it? And by when do I need to do it? Because if you don't, you will either do the wrong work, do it the wrong way, or not do it on time. And chaos will erupt, either because your manager forgot to tell you a certain detail or didn't think it was important enough to share. Either way, that comes back, unfortunately, to tarnish your reputation and tarnish your competence, one of those 3 C's. The third one, I think you asked for 3, so I'll give you one last one before I toss it back to you, which is that when you're in a job, you're in one of 2 unspoken modes. You're in either when you're in the workplace, you're in one of 2 modes. You're in either learner mode or leader mode. Learner mode is when people know that you're new and that you don't know everything yet. And so the expectation, the unspoken expectation, is that you'll ask questions. If it's not appropriate to ask questions during the meeting, you'll end up pulling your manager or coworker aside after the meeting to clarify questions that you couldn't have Googled for the answer for yourself. If you don't, people will start questioning your second C, your commitment, and see you as maybe a little bit too passive. However, as time goes on and your internship progresses, or you start getting assignments and taking ownership of tasks, slowly that mode shifts from learner mode to leader mode, where the expectation is no longer that you don't know anything. The expectation is that you're closest to the details. So you know more than anyone what the right questions are to be asking, or what the smart comment should be that one should be making. And so in that mode, the expectation is no longer that you'll stay quiet. The expectation is that you'll contribute. And if you don't contribute, then you will once again be perceived as incompetent, that first C, or uncommitted, that second C. So know which of those two modes you're in at any given point, because we're all in either learner mode or leader mode.
I think that's super practical advice. And kind of further down that timeline as people progress, whether it's in an internship, entry-level position, or even further along in their career, sometimes it's difficult for it to not feel like competition. But at the end of the day, a lot of performance reviews at companies, you are kind of stacked up against everyone else in your class or in your cohort. So what some specific advice would you give to folks who are thinking about kind of this longer term career? And what are some of the consistent habits that they can build in to continually do well over time and build on top of previous successes?
Mm-hmm. In the last chapter of my book, I talk about the promotion side of things, and several questions that we can all start asking ourselves, even as early as our first day, but especially if you're trying to get promoted, which is the following questions. What can I do that hasn't been done? What can I fix that hasn't been fixed? What can I share that hasn't been shared? What can I bridge that hasn't been bridged? These questions can help you identify hidden opportunities to be valuable to your team, where I also talk about an unspoken rule of pattern recognition, where if you see a client or a customer complaining about the same thing over and over again, or higher ups who are complaining about certain pain points, that may be a problem that you could fix that hasn't been fixed before. Or if you have been paying attention to the big picture and how your company, organization, nonprofit is fitting in with its competitor base, and you're setting those Google alerts and you're paying attention and seeing that, oh, our competitor is doing this and that, you now have an opportunity to do what hasn't been done. And in my book, I talk about someone who was hired as a temp, actually, at a staffing agency. This person was in charge of submitting paperwork. But over the course of overhearing her coworkers, this person realized that the managers were complaining about not being able to find enough people to place in jobs. This was a staffing agency. And so she thought to herself, well, duh, that's, of course you're not finding enough nurses, because you're relying on emails and phone calls. Whereas all of my friends who are nurses, this was a person who was in the Philippines, actually. This is, shows the geographic scope of my book. It turned out that nurses in the Philippines predominantly used Facebook to find their jobs. And so she went on to Facebook, joined a bunch of nursing groups, and started realizing that their competitors were actually posting jobs in those groups instead. And so what she did was she took some screenshots, presented it to her manager, and helped them appreciate that, wow, we're missing out on this big opportunity. She had fixed a problem that hasn't been fixed, and she had done something that hadn't been done. And in doing so, ended up turning what would have otherwise been a dead-end job into a career-building opportunity. And this person ended up becoming one of the youngest managers in the company. So this is a habit that we can all start adopting, because these hidden opportunities are around us every day. We just need to acknowledge them and really take hold of them.
Absolutely. And I'm getting some really good questions coming in from Q&A, actually. So I would love to launch into some of those questions. And for anyone else who has more questions, feel free to send them in the chat as well. So on the back of some of what we were talking about earlier, we got a question coming in about how to stay in touch with a mentor. This person's comment is that they feel like staying in touch with a person that they meet in a lecture or a workshop like this could be easy, but the staying in touch part is really hard. So meeting someone relatively easier, but staying in touch and really building a relationship long term is harder. So any tips or advice for that?
Yeah, it is difficult if you're only meeting someone in a singular setting at a point in time, and there aren't regular interaction points. The first thing that I would do is to at least get an email chain started. So send a follow-up email and say, Shuo, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me today. Really appreciate your guidance around X and Y. I'm going to be applying some of your advice in the coming weeks, and I'd love to stay in touch and let you know how it goes. Best regards, Gorick. Simply starting that email chain can be so effective because, hey, Shuo is a busy person. Shuo may not necessarily get to your email, but the fact that you've built that relationship now allows you to reply to that email in the future and to follow up. So you're now in the future, whether it's a month from now, a year from now, a decade from now, you're now picking up where you left off versus starting that relationship from scratch. The second thing that I would try to be mindful of is how you can be valuable. And I think this is maybe a little bit of confidence building that's required as well, where what is this other person trying to accomplish? And in what way can I help them achieve their goals? Sometimes it's actually you helping them with a certain project that they mentioned. Other times it could be you paying attention to the news and finding a podcast or a YouTube video or a news article or a conference and forwarding it along and saying, Shuo, didn't we just talk about this like 2 weeks ago? Are you aware of this podcast? I thought that it might be interesting to you, especially given that you were talking about how your marketing team is thinking about doing A and B. Again, Shuo may not end up replying, but I always have the mantra of don't self-reject, where the worst thing that can happen is the other person says no. Don't be the one to say no to yourself, because you never know where this seemingly benign but useful email can lead you.
And that reminds me of your very helpful TikTok videos that just give snippets of career advice in kind of short chunks, digestible every day. So for anyone who's on TikTok, I definitely recommend you guys check out Gorick's TikTok account with really good advice, especially because your first piece of advice on thank you emails, I remember stumbling across a TikTok video on that. So I think that's actually really helpful. I'm sure as a career advisor at Harvard, you've mentored a bunch of people and you genuinely care about what they're doing, whether they've become really successful with your advice or even if they're struggling. I'm sure you're genuinely interested in knowing whether or not you reply to that email. At least it's always good to hear back from someone that you've talked to or helped just to hear where they are and how they're doing. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, that at least you don't self-reject and reach out to people. And another question that I have is, I guess not specific to a particular year in college, but your recommendation to a student, whether in college and our grad or in grad, on how to maximize their time in school, whether it's with internships, extra classes, something else.
Yeah, great question. And I think COVID is especially friendly to taking advantage of opportunities, where the way I think about school is that getting good grades is only the price of admission. And there are cutoffs and there are sliding scales. Cutoffs are things like your GPA when it came to college admissions, your SAT scores, your ACT scores, where once you reach a certain level, you're quote unquote good enough. And is a company really going to take someone who has, let's say, a 3.8 over someone who has a 3.81, right? Like, is that really a material difference? And so once you've reached a certain level in your academics, I would focus a lot more of my time on extracurriculars. And so in that case, I would look at clubs on campus, startups you can join, part-time internships that you can join, and think about where you might want to see yourself in the future. And if you don't know, that's fine as well. And that's where a lot of people are, where use every experience as a hypothesis testing opportunity, where every article you read, every podcast you listen to, every speaker you meet, every internship you get, every club meeting you join is another opportunity for you to ask yourself, how's my body reacting? Am I feeling really tired despite having gotten a lot of rest last night? And if so, maybe that's your body telling you that you're actually not that interested. And so when it comes to taking advantage of opportunities, I would, if you're not sure of what you want to do, I would sign up for everything and quit things along the way that you don't find to be all that engaging. And before you know it, it's kind of like throwing dots onto a scatter plot. The more dots, the better that line of best fit will be. Once you've gotten to that clarity around where that line sits, you now have a chance to double down. And that's where labor market signaling comes in. Labor market signaling is a fancy way of saying what on your resume is going to resonate with the person that you're trying to impress, the hiring manager, the recruiter, whoever's on the other side of the table making a hiring decision. And there, as many of you will probably experience firsthand, I've certainly experienced it, is the experience of you need relevant experience to get relevant experience. And no one's willing to give a chance to someone who's unproven. And so if you know that you have a sense of, oh, I kind of want to do software engineering, or I kind of want to go into consulting, or maybe I'm interested in international development. Well, if you have even the slightest idea that that may be a path that you want to pursue, next you want to start searching for opportunities to start getting relevant experience. If you're not sure of where to begin, LinkedIn is also a great option, where this comes back to the unspoken rule of pattern recognition, actually, where we all think we're special, when in the end, we're all a part of a bigger process and system, and there are patterns across how people have navigated from point A to point B. And so one exercise that I do all the time is anytime I meet someone that I look up to and I think to myself, wow, I would love to be like them, I immediately go on Google and I stalk them. And I read their bio, I read their blogs, I look at their Wikipedia page if they have one, I look at their LinkedIn profiles, and I start seeing what are the experiences that this person has had when they were in my position. In what sequence did they do certain experiences? And after 4, 5, 6 of these stalking sessions, you're going to have a pretty clear idea of what, not necessarily what you should do, but at least what others have done that is the tried and tested path.
Perfect. I actually have people asking in chat for your TikTok channel and whatnot. So we will send a follow-up email to everyone with links to everything, including Gorick's book. We'll also be posting this on YouTube. So I think Maya might have sent out the YouTube channel link. So if you guys want to rewatch parts of what Gorick said, we'll hyperlink that on YouTube as well, so you guys can find all of his TikTok videos. I have another question asking, besides your own book coming out, are there any other books that you would recommend reading? Any podcasts or blogs that you would recommend following? Well, obviously Gorick has written some articles on LinkedIn, so that's there.
Yeah, it's hard for me to sort of make a blanket statement around which blogs, because it so depends on what you're interested in. If you're interested in startups, like I subscribe, for example, to Launch Ticker. I listen to Pivot. I listen to This Week in Startups. So, free advertising for folks who run those podcasts. This is going to be somewhat of a cop-out answer, but I would quite honestly, whatever domain you're interested in, let's say you're interested in education, or you're interested in tech in Asia, or you're interested in politics, go on Google and search for American politics podcasts, top, and maybe comes back to the idea of pattern recognition. Sorry to beat that drum so hard and so repeatedly, but after just looking at the first 2 pages, 3 pages, you're going to get a sense that, oh, everyone's talking about the same 4 or 5 podcasts over and over again. So sorry to not be very direct, because I unfortunately can't read your mind, but hopefully this gets you started.
Yeah, if you guys have follow-ups to any of the questions already asked, feel free to send in the chat as well. But on that question, I have to give a shout out to the Decode team for organizing this event as well. I think they're always doing really good work. I've been advising them for a few years now. They've had really cool speakers all across the board, from tech to startups to innovation. So I think that is always a really cool way to get involved. If anyone wants to volunteer, definitely reach out to Maya or Darren or Perry, who are on this call. Our next event is actually coming up at the end of the month, not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that. Gorick was talking about LinkedIn. We'll actually be having the chief economist at LinkedIn coming in to talk a little bit, not just about economics, given her previous experiences in similar roles at Google and the Fed, but also talking about kind of how data science comes together with the human story aspect of the impact of COVID. What are some best practices that they've seen on LinkedIn with people creating new opportunities? So a quick plug for that. Coming back to other questions that we've had. We have another question about thinking in terms of longer term career. What are some regular habits that you've developed? And this could be on different frequencies, whether it's on everything that you do on a daily basis or monthly basis or annual basis, things that you feel like are habits that, you know, have built yourself into a place where you're able to develop better habits over time.
Yeah. If I may, I'm going to get a little bit philosophical on this one, because, you know, I could very easily say, get enough sleep and things that you could probably, you've probably found enough clickbait about on the habit side. But what is a habit, albeit a philosophical habit for me, is to continually ask myself, what do I want to contribute / what do I want to change / whose life do I want to improve? And that's still an ongoing iterative process. Another way of framing this as well is, what problem do I want to solve? If you get into the habit of doing that on a regular basis, you will, over time, even if it doesn't happen immediately, get closer to finding a profession that you will be excited about over the long term. And once you answer that question, I would say the next question becomes, given what I want to do, who do I need to impress and what will they be impressed by? And this comes down to a mantra that I've developed and sort of continually told myself, which is that prestige is locally defined. What I mean by that is different paths in different professions are going to value different things. If you want to go to law school because you care a great deal about criminal justice, that's going to require a different set of extracurricular activities, classes, GPA, than if you want to go to medical school, or if you want to become a software engineer, or if you wanted to enter venture capital. And each of these paths, no matter what they are going to have gatekeepers. Even if you're an entrepreneur, the gatekeepers to you, unless you want to bootstrap your company, is going to be VCs. In which case the question becomes, what are VCs going to be impressed by? What types of experiences, skills, and what types of ideas are they most interested in? And so I continually ask myself that question just to make sure that I'm still on track, because it's easy to get trapped into doing busy work. That it's easy to feel tired at the end of the day, to feel like you did a lot, to pack your calendar with a lot of activities, when only a fraction of those activities actually get you closer to where you want to do, the problem that you want to solve, and the people that you need to impress in order to solve that problem.
So I have still a bunch of questions coming in. Maybe I'll just kind of group them together a little bit. So maybe we'll take two to three last questions, and then we will let people kind of follow up afterwards. The well, I guess second or third to last question we have is, we talked a lot about people who already have a job or are kind of managers in their jobs, but how would this potentially apply to people who are still looking for jobs?
Yeah. So I like to think that the 3 C's apply to your job search, where when you're networking and asking for an introduction, your competence, compatibility, and commitment are on full display. And so you end up doing this awkward dance of needing to ask for advice, but at the same time, needing to impress the person that you're asking questions to. So when it comes to those 3 C's, something that I advise my students here at Harvard is, hey, I'm safe space. I'd like to think that I am like, you can come to me with your stupid questions. I'm not going to judge you because that's my job, is to help you. But when you start contacting people who are second degree connections or people through cold email, that's when you want to make sure that your competence and commitment are as strong as they can be. So in the case of contacting someone because you're interested in entering, I don't know, as a data scientist at a certain tech company, reserve the questions about what is a data scientist for the people like me in your life, where you can really ask those basic questions. The questions that you would prefer to ask the data scientist that you want to impress and you want to work with is something more sophisticated, like, oh, I noticed that your company is working on this and that you previously worked in this as well. I happen to have worked on this in a prior internship. Can you tell me a bit more about blank? And that's an unspoken rule that I talk about in my book, which is the unspoken rule of do and show your homework, where you need to show up having done a bit of Google searching, and you need to show that you've done that Google searching by prefacing your question with tidbits of details around what you learned. And then you end in the question instead of just diving straight into the question. So I think that the 3 C's in one way or another are going to be relevant to you. When it comes to, as a college student, I would really try to get as many work experience as you can under your belt, coming back to the idea of labor market signaling, where in the end, because prestige is locally defined and because labor market signaling is a thing, no matter what you end up wanting to do, you're going to have people who will have done more than you, right? And I see this all the time with students at Harvard who, for example, wanted to be pre-med for the longest time. And so pursued activities and extracurriculars and shadowing experiences and internships that set them on that path, only to switch and only to realize that people were playing a very different game with a very different set of rules if they wanted to go into tech or finance or something else. So what I would encourage you to do is to really rack up those experiences, as not only just sort of quickly, but also as methodically as possible, so that you can get closer to going from exploration mode to pursuing your goals mode.
Perfect. I'll ask the second to last question. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to share in chat. So second to last question, what made you realize that you didn't want to go into traditional investment banking or management consulting?
Yeah, let me, it was a cost-benefit analysis. I'm trying to find a non-jargony way of saying this, but it was a cost-benefit analysis where these jobs are really great jobs. And those of you who've seen the brochures, gone on the website, seen the YouTube videos, been to the coffee chats will know that these jobs offer most, if not all, things that one would want in a job. You get good pay, prestige, variety in the case of consulting, smart coworkers who are ambitious. You have great perks. You potentially get to work in a really exciting city with a lot of other young people. These jobs set you up to do other things in the future, where the alumni networks are ones where you can contact and say, hey, I'm X whatever, and they'd more often than not be willing to take your call. So when it comes to those extrinsic motivators, you really can't get better than a lot of these jobs. What I personally realized, though, is that there was a criteria that I hadn't quite taken into account. And the criteria was the F word, fulfillment. And fulfillment is something that is deeply personal. So I can't say that my definition of fulfillment is the one that we should all subscribe to, but it very much comes back to my personal upbringing of feeling like I had accumulated a great deal of privilege over my life, and I was now in a position to pay it forward. The ball was now in my court of, now that I'm in this position, am I going to do it? And so I ended up picturing this imaginary conversation between Gorick as a 26-year-old and Gorick as, let's say, a 16-year-old. I started asking myself, what would 16-year-old Gorick want 26-year-old Gorick to be doing? And I think it became clear that paying it forward was what I'd find most fulfilling. And I could do it on the side, or I can do it as really the next chapter of my career. And that's the path that I ended up choosing.
Amazing. So I think we have time for just one last question. So maybe I will leave that as an open-ended question instead of picking a specific one from the chat list. What would be some parting words you would like to leave us with? Please.
I would say that we're all incredibly privileged, especially at a time like this during COVID, where we have the housing security, the internet access, the networks to be able to access an event like this. So even though it may not seem like you have anything to offer because, oh, I'm just a college student, or I'm just in an entry-level job, or I'm just this or just that, I think that each of us are very likely, if not definitely, role models to someone. To those of you who are in college, there are going to be plenty of high school students who are looking up to you and wanting to be who you are today. So I would encourage you to try and pay it forward in your own ways. Answer that cold email, mentor that student, because it's really this relay race of paying it forward that makes the world a better place. And it doesn't need to be in the form of a fancy nonprofit or really anything other than you spending time with someone who could benefit from your time, energy, wisdom, efforts. That's what I would leave you with.
Thank you very much, Gorick. I know that the Zoom format doesn't really allow for a lot of kind of direct engagement from everyone on the call with us now. So something Gorick and I have discussed briefly, but in the works, is that we may do a follow-up session with a small roundtable. If in the follow-up email we send, you guys indicate a lot of interest, we could put out an application form for a smaller roundtable, so we can have a small group of people get together, whether it's in a breakout room setting on Zoom, or we can kind of figure out what that looks like, but be able to directly chat with Gorick in a smaller setting, say a dozen people or less, so you guys can have a more intimate conversation, and hopefully also address that question of how do you then start to build a relationship with someone in a virtual context. So with that, thank you so much again, Gorick, for your time, and we will definitely follow up with this recorded video on YouTube, as well as links to your book, your TikTok account, and anything else you would like to share with us.
Sounds great. Shuo, thanks so much for organizing Decode. Thanks so much for having me. And to all of you who are streaming in from around the world, it means a great deal to be spending this hour with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gorick, and thank you to everyone on this call now, as well as anyone tuning in via live stream. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
See you next time.
Yeah, so all right, I guess this marks the end of our session. Thank you all for coming, and we certainly hope you enjoyed the session and have huge takeaways from Gorick's sharing. And once again, those who want to purchase Gorick's book today, after today's session, we will be sending out an after this event with link to his Amazon page. And also we will be uploading the recording on our YouTube and send out links to everyone as well. And then, so yeah, we hope to see you again on our next speaker event on the 27th January with Karen Kimbrough, our chief economist at LinkedIn. Thank you so much.